Welcome back, everybody, to the Michigan Trails Report podcast. I am your host, Tom Funk. Today we're going to take a journey from Mackinac to the Sault with Henry Schoolcraft and Lewis Cass as part of the Lewis Cass expedition of 1820. So put on your leather boots, grab a paddle. We're going to take a little trip up and down the St. Mary's and kind of explore our way up to the Sault and follow along with Henry Schoolcraft and his diary. And as I mentioned before in this series, please keep in mind that there is language that is used in this narrative that may not sound right or may make you feel uncomfortable. I've changed some of the words a little bit. But kept most of the context the same. But my big part in this is cleaning up all the grammar and all the run-on sentences, because Schoolcraft was notorious for that. So, with that being said, here we go, and we are going to take up our paddles, and we're gonna hit the water, if you will. I'm sure they saw some crows and some ravens when they were doing their thing back in the day. And today's day that they're going to be paddling is going to be June 13th. And the provisions and stores shipped from Detroit did not reach Mackinac until the 10th. We also found our canoes deficient both size and construction, and to embark on the provisions of the expedition, an additional number would be required. And to secure our corn, flour, bacon, etc. more completely from exposure, it was considered advantageous to get the principal part of these articles packed up in 10-gallon kegs, an arrangement that would also very much facilitate the loading and unloading, which must at least be performed every morning and every evening. Additional sources of delay arose from military equipment, the tardiness of mechanics, and unfavorable winds, which prevented us from quitting Mackinac until this morning. Our whole force now consisted of 42 persons, embarked in 4 canoes, exclusive of a detachment of 22 soldiers from the garrison of Mackinac, under the command of Lieutenant Pierce, which occupied a 12-oared barge. This escort was deemed necessary to accompany us to the Sault, where the Indians were reported to entertain a spirit of hostility towards the United States, and some even went so far as to affirm that they would attempt to stop our passage through Lake Superior. We left the harbor of Mackinac at 10 o'clock in the morning with a favorable breeze, which carried us at the rate of 5 miles per hour, and passed the detour before sunset, ascended the Straits of St. Mary 5 miles, and encamped on the west shore opposite Drummond's Island. The entire distance is 45 miles. The intermediate places of most note are Out-Ardy Island at a distance of 3 leagues from Michilimackinac, and the mouth of the Rapid River, which is passed at a distance of 20 miles. The banks of Lake Huron are generally low and swampy in some places, and there are sandy plains covered with pine. The shore is strewed with fragments of limestone, granite, and hornblende, and the former, in compact form, appears in situ at the few places where we had an opportunity to examine it. A ridge of highland appears on the mainland east of Mackinac, stretching off towards the Sault, and in a general course northeast. The ridge belongs to that mountain chain of which the island of Michilimackinac is probably one of the disjointed links, but we are not enabled to say that this remark will be justified by geological correspondences. The detour is the western cape of the Straits of St. Mary, distant 40 miles from Michilimackinac, and situated, according to Mackenzie, in north latitude 45 degrees 54 minutes. Here, our course has suddenly changed from east to north and northwest. Consequently, the wind, which has been favorable thus far, proved a serious inconvenience at the moment of our turning the point. No current in the strait has, however, as yet been experienced. The mercury has not risen over 63 degrees in the shade, although standing at 82 in the sun. In the course of the afternoon of this day, on landing in a small cove on the Huron shore, we saw a large porcupine on the beach, on which one of the voyagers immediately jumped out of the canoe and killed it with a hatchet. This animal has generally been confounded by the travelers of the region with the hedgehog, which is entirely different in its characters and habits, and is not supposed to inhabit the northern regions of America, although it is frequently found in high northern latitudes in Europe, as in Norway, Sweden, and Russia. Buffon gives two engravings of the porcupine as a distant species under the name of Le Urson and Le Coendo, both said to inhabit the Canadas. But there is some reason to suppose that he has described the same animal in its summer and winter dress, as the thinness and scarcity of hair on his Le Urson is the principal characteristic difference. A porcupine is known to shed a great portion of its hair as the warm season approaches. This animal is called cacua by the Indians, by whom it is highly valued for its quills. The skin does not form an article of traffic, but serves them as a vessel to hold bear's oil and as medicine bags or short pouches. The quills are dyed with indigenous plants of various beautiful colors and employed to trim the edges of their moccasins, leggings, skins, and dresses. The colors, which are red, blue, green, black, and yellow, are very bright and permanent, and a moccasin or Indian shoe which has been thus ornamented. And this may be worn at any length of time in mud and water without perceiving that the coloring matter of the quills is anyway obliterated or discharged. The Indians are also very fond of flesh of this animal, which is said to be delicious and to resemble in flavor a young pig. It fixes its habitation under the roots of trees, but being provided with sharp claws, also ascends their boughs in quest of fruit. There are 4 claws on each forepaw and 5 on the hinder ones. It has small cars hid in the hair and a long bushy tail covered with coarse hair, white and black. It is said to be a lazy animal, seldom going more than a mile from its habitation. It has a slow motion and is easily overtaken and killed. When attacked, it appears to rely with a foolish confidence upon its quills, which are in reality a very inefficient defense. It has no power to eject them, but when touched, they easily leave the skin of the porcupine, that is, but will not work their way into the flesh of the victim, as has been represented. The Indians, however, employ them for boring their ears and noses. They seldom make use of the rifle in killing this animal, but run up and dispatch it with a tomahawk. The one now killed would probably weigh 8 pounds. June 14th. We embarked at 5 o'clock in the morning and reached the Sault Ste. Marie in season to pitch our tents before sunset. The distance is 45 miles. The country continues low and swampy until you come within 3 or 4 miles of the Sault, where it is handsomely elevated. There are 2 rapids in the intermediate distance, which are ascended with a loaded canoe. The lake, or strait, may be supposed to cease, and the river to commence at the foot of the first rapid, called Miskooten or Nibbish, as there are no perceptible current below it, where the strait assumes a great width and is filled with innumerable islands. Keeping close to the western shore, these islands constantly bound the view on the east until within 5 miles of the Sault, where the different channels unite. The ship channel lies on the east side of the islands, where the great body of water passes, and the rapids are less formidable. In passing up the rapid of the Nibbish in the west channel, which is generally taken by canoes, we experienced a very swift current and shallow water and injured one of our canoes so much that we were compelled to reach the head of it to unload and repair them. It was 1 o'clock when we passed the rapid, and this accident consumed a couple of hours. In the meantime, the sky became overcast, the wind arose and blew ahead, and the very heavy peals of thunder indicated an approaching storm. After waiting some time, however, without getting any rain, we reloaded the canoes and embarked, and had proceeded 5 or 6 miles when a heavy shower of rain commenced. It did not compel us to land, and at 6 o'clock in the evening, the sky was clear. We now passed the site of the village of St. Joseph, upon the island of the same name, where the British maintained a garrison before the late war. This would be the War of 1812. But it was demolished by Colonel Croghan previous to his attack upon the island of Mackinac, and the village burnt. Since that period, the English have fortified Drummond's Island at the entrance of the straits, which is now the depot of the Indian trade. The island of St. Joseph is large and fertile and is considerably cultivated. previous to the late war. It is computed to be 75 miles in circumference and to cover an area of 57,600 acres, which is 7 times the size of Mackinac Island. The site of the demolished fort is elevated about 50 feet and is extremely beautiful and commanding. It was first occupied by the British in 1795, preparatory to the surrender of Mackinac, which took place the following year. The stone chimneys on the former houses are still standing to attest the barbarous policy of war. At 8 o'clock, we passed the second rapid, but without injury to our canoes. This is situated 2 miles below the village of the Sault, and on reaching the head of it, we have a handsome view of that village with the intervening river and shore and the dense forest of elm, sugar maple, ash, and pine, which line this part of the river. In passing up the river from the detour, no change in the geological appearance of the country is seen until we approach the head of the island of St. Joseph, where the compact limestone disappears and is succeeded by a red sandstone. The latter rock is particularly apparent in the ensuing rapid in the bed of the river and continues from that onward. June 15th, the Sault de Ste. Marie is the largest of the 3 rapids that impede the navigation of the River St. Mary between Lake Superior and Lake Huron and puts a final stop in the ship navigation of the northern lakes. It is situated 15 miles below the foot of Lake Superior and 90 northwest of the island of Mackinac, the latitude being 46 degrees north, 31 minutes, according to Mackenzie. The fall of the river at this rapid, as ascertained by Colonel Gratiot, is 22 feet 10 inches in a little more than half a mile, which is nearly the same as the fall of the Ohio at Louisville in the distance of 2 miles. Unlike that, however, it can never at any season of the year be ascended with large vessels. Canoes and barges usually go up with half a load, the balance being carried over the portage, but returning descend with a full load. The bed of the river consists of horizontal strata of red and variegated sandstone, which has been much worn, broken, and carried away, and large fragments of it, together with blocks of mixed granite and hornblende, out of place, is thickly strewed throughout the rapid, and by opposing the rush of water, they threw it violently in all directions at a distance of half a mile. This gives it the appearance of a bank of foam. Several wooded islands upon the inclined plane of the falls contrast with the deep foliage of the hemlock, spruce, and pine with the snowy whiteness of the rapids, producing a contrast that has a pleasing effect. With the shadowy outlines of the distant mountains of Lake Superior, the singular mixture of forest trees upon the shores, and the fishing canoes of the savages, which are constantly seen at the foot of the falls, rendering one of the most picturesque views of the northern scenery. I have attempted to seize upon some of the prominent features of the scene in the accompanying sketch, and there's a plate in the book that you can check out if you ever get the book. And this may also serve to convey an idea of the usual manner in which the maple and pine and elm, the hemlock, are intermingled in the forest upon the banks of this beautiful stream. The village of the Sault Ste. Marie is on the south or American shore and consists of 15 to 20 buildings occupied by 5 or 6 English families. Among them is of J. Johnson, Esquire, a gentleman of rank, who, in the prosecution of the Northwest fur trade, settled here shortly after the close of the American Revolution and married the daughter of a Chippewa chief. In the hospitality and politeness, which, during our stay at the Sault, we experienced his family, and we have been made to forget our insulated situation, and to observe how short participation in the blandishments of refined society is sufficient to obliterate the effect of the fatigues and privations of traveling. So it's important to note here that a lot of people think, wow, there were no people up there. Well, of course, the Native Americans were there forever, but there were Europeans living there since the Revolutionary War era. As a matter of fact, there were French living up there when the war started. Michigan actually sent one person to serve in the Revolutionary War. His name escapes me, but he was a French landowner in the area. So it has been habitated by Europeans for a while. Continuing on, the site of the village is elevated and pleasant, and a regular plan appears to have been observed in the buildings, though some of them are in a state of dilapidation. Altogether, it has the marks of an ancient settlement fallen to decay. Such indeed it is, having been settled by the French shortly after the occupation of Old Mackinac, and it continued for a long time as the site of a French fort and Jesuit mission. Charlevoix, in 1721, speaks of this mission as one of no recent date. And Henry in 1762 found there a stockaded fort with a small garrison under the command of a French national officer who addressed by the title of governor. There were then 4 houses, 2 of which had been occupied as barracks, and the fort is described as seated on a beautiful plain of about 2 miles in circumference and covered with luxuriant. Excuse me. Charlevoix's Journal, Henry's Travels, and have documented this quite well. So those are pretty interesting books to read as well. There are at present about 40 lodges of Chippewa Indians, called salteurs by the French, containing a population of about 200 souls who subsist wholly upon the whitefish. The method of taking them is this. Each canoe carries 2 men, one of which steers the paddle, and the other is provided with a pole, 10 foot in length, and the end of which is affixed with a scoop net. The steersman sets the canoe from the eddy of one rock to that of another, while the fisherman in the prow, who sees through the pellucid element, the prey of which he is in pursuit, dips his net and sometimes bring up, with every dip, as many as they can contain. The fish are often crowded together in the water in great numbers, and it takes a skillful fisherman in autumn, and it'll take them about 500 fish in 2 hours. Fishery is of a great moment to the surrounding Indians, who supplies it with a large proportion of their winter's provision. For having taken the fish in the manner described, they cure them by drying them in smoke, laying them up in large quantities. These fish are preferred by most to our party as well, and we call them Mackinac trout. And their abundance may render them an important article in the commerce of the upper lakes. So if you have ever eaten whitefish, that is the fish that they were catching. On the north or Canadian shore of the river, there are also 6 or 7 dwelling houses occupied by the French and English families, exclusive of the Northwest Company's establishment, which is seated immediately at the foot of the falls and consists of several stores and dwelling houses, a sawmill, and a boatyard. These are represented on the right side of the view of the Sioux, and there's another plate in the book that kind of sketches that out for you. This company has also constructed a canal with a lock at its lower entrance and a towing path for drawing up barges and canoes. At the head of the rapid, they have built a pier from one of the islands, forming a harbor, and there a schooner is generally lying to receive the goods, destined for the Grand Portage, Minnesota, and the regions of Northwest Lake Superior. And June 16th, the commanding position of the Sault Ste. Marie on the outlet of Lake Superior and the head of ship navigation had early pointed it out to the French as an advantageous site for a military and trading post. We accordingly find that it was occupied as such at an early period in the settlement of Canada. By this place, all the fur trade of the Northwest is compelled to pass, and is the grand thoroughfare of Indian communications for upper countries as far as the Arctic Circle. Independent of these circumstances, the advantages of taking the whitefish at the foot of the rapids has always rendered it a place of resort to the Indian tribes of the region. And this is particularly true in the summer season when the hunting is most precarious. No place could, therefore, be better adapted to acquire an influence over the savage tribes, to monopolize their commerce, and to guard the frontier settlements against their incursions. It is, indeed, surprising to reflect upon the early enterprise and sound judgment of the French in seizing in upon these points, commanding all the natural avenues and passages of the lakes, particularly when it considered that these selections must necessarily have been the result of an intimate acquaintance with the geographical features of the country. This is yearly proved by the reoccupation of posts at places long neglected, but the importance of which have become apparent in proportion as we have just a set value upon the Indian trade and the country's natural advantages. Perhaps in no instance this is more strikingly exemplified than the Sioux, the commanding position of which, although always known to the traders, but lately has been perceived by our government. The advantages of that rival nation has taken of this neglect could not fail to excite attention at a period when such laudable exertions are making in all parts of the Union to explore the geography and to call into action the hidden resources of the country. It appears to have been among the primary objects of the expedition to prepare the way for the introduction of the American garrison at this place. To attain this objective, a council of the chiefs of the Chippewa tribe was this morning summoned at the governor's marquee, and the views of the government explained to them. By the Treaty of Greenville of 1795, a saving clause had been inserted by General Wayne covering any gifts or grants of land in the Northwest Territories which the Indians had formerly made to the French or English governments, and this clause has been renewed in the third article of this treaty after reciting several particular sections of lands, posts, carrying places numbered 1 to 11. It also cedes the post of Detroit and all land to the north, the west, and the south of it, of which the Indian title has been extinguished by gifts or grants to the French or English governments. Treaty with the Wyandot, Delaware, Shawnee, Ottawa, Chippewa, Potawatomi, Miami, Eel River, Wea, Kickapoo, Piankashaw, and Kalkaska nations. This was on the 3rd of August, 1795. The Indians, seated in their usual ceremonious manner, listened attentively, and several of the chiefs spoke in reply. They were opposed to the proposition and first endeavored to evade it by pretending to know nothing of the former grant. However, this point being pressed home was afterward given up. Still, they continued to speak in an evasive and desultory manner, which amounted to a negative refusal. It was also observable that there was no great unanimity of opinion among them, and some animated discussion between themselves took place. Some appeared in favor of settling the boundary, provided as it was not intended to be occupied by a garrison, saying that they were afraid that in cases their young men might prove unruly and kill the cattle and the hogs that should stray away from the garrison. This was intended as a threat, and I was particularly struck with the reply of Governor Cass to the chief who had thrown it out, in which he said that as to the establishment of a garrison at the Sioux, they might give themselves no uneasiness, for that point was already settled, and so sure as the sun, which was then rising, would set. So sure would there be an American garrison sent to that place, whether they renewed the grant or not. Such a decision has always had great weight with the Indians, and in the present instance it was particularly so, as a casual but indiscreet and unauthorized conversation which had been held by some officers of our party with one of the chiefs before the council assembled and had given them to understand that the United States did not wish to occupy the Sioux as a military post. They were, however, determined not to accede to our wishes, and in seeing ourselves surrounded by a brilliantly assembly of chiefs, dressed in costly broadcloth feathers, epaulets, medals, and silverwares of British fabric, and armed from the manufactories of Birmingham, all gratuitously given, we could not mistake the influence by which they were actuated in this negotiation. When, therefore, several hours had been spent during the latter part, of which the Indians employed a very animated language and strong gesticulation, the council broke up, and somewhat abruptly, without coming to any final decision, at least, without assenting to the proposition. The last chief who spoke, called the Count, in the course of drew his war lance and struck it furiously in the ground before him, and assumed the look of a savage wilderness, which appeared to produce a corresponding effect upon the other Indians, for there was an evident agitation among them. During the latter part of the council, and when he left the marquis, he kicked away the present that had been laid before him. On breaking up, they proceeded directly to their encampment, and we dispersed to our tents. A few moments only had, however, elapsed before it was discovered that the Indians had hoisted, get this, the British flag in their encampment. On being informed of this, Governor Cass immediately ordered the expedition under arms and called the interpreter and proceeded with no other escort to the chief's lodge before whose door had been erected, took down the insulting flag, and carried it back to our camp. Upon this occasion, he entered the lodge of the chief who had raised it, and this was the same chief who had before drawn his war lance, and told him it was an indignity that they were not permitted to offer upon the American territories, that we were their natural guardians and friends, and we were always studious to render them strict justice, and to promote their peace and their happiness. But the flag was distinguishing token of national power connected with our honor and independence. that two national standards could not fly in peace upon the same territory, and that they were forbidden to raise any but our own American flag, and they should, again, presume to attempt it, the United States would set a strong foot upon their necks and crush them to the earth. Yeesh. This intrepid conduct struck with the Indians with astonishment and produced an effect which we were not at the moment sensible was all that prevented an open rupture. 10 minutes after the governors returned to our camp, the Indians cleared their lodges of every woman and child, covering the river with canoes, and expecting to decisive a step to be followed by a general attack of their camp. In the meantime, it was looked upon by the expedition as a preparatory movement to savage war whoop, and we stood prepared to encounter the shock. Our number at this time, including Lieutenant Pierce's command, was 66 men, well armed and prepared, about 30 of whom were United States soldiers. The number of Indian warriors upon the ground was between 70 and 80, being also well armed in the Indian manner. Our encampment was regularly informed upon the green, near the banks of the river. The Indians occupied an eminence which was formerly the site of the French fort at the distance of 500 or 600 yards and separated from us by a small ravine. We were kept in this state of alarm for some time, and when the Indians had ceased to hold themselves in a hostile attitude, the soldiers were dismissed to their tents. In the meantime, an overture was proposed by some of the older chiefs who had not been present in the council in the morning, and about 7 o'clock in the evening a treaty was concluded and signed, by which they secede the United States a tract of land 4 miles square, commencing at the Sioux, extending 2 miles up, and then same distance down the river, with a depth of 4 miles, including the portage, and the site of the village and the old fort, but reserving the right of fishing at the falls and encampment upon the shore. When the agreement was concluded, the Indian ceremony of smoking the pipe of peace and shaking hands mentioned in before was performed, and their signatures by mark were afterward obtained. And for this accession of land, they were paid on the spot in blankets, knives, silverwares, broadcloths, and other Indian goods. Wow. Bet you didn't know that took place, did you? Came really close to disaster there, and if you read into it, cooler and more wise heads prevailed to avoid any casualties. But that was the beginning of the land cessation in the Upper Peninsula, starting there in the Sioux in 1820. All right, our next trip, we're going to be cruising along Lake Superior, heading west towards Duluth. And we'll do another episode here in the next month or so. So please subscribe. Please look at all the content. Check it out. As always, I thank you for joining us. And special thanks to my friend Adam Main, who provides the music and podcasts. Adam is a musician in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And with that, Adam will lead us out. Thanks a lot. See you next time.